Goldman Sachs has just published a 50-page primer telling its institutional clients that China has already won the AI race. Not catching up, won. By the end of this video, you'll know Goldman's exact verdict, how China closed the capability gap without American chips, and which names Goldman is telling its clients to own. If you're holding NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, or Amazon, and you miss this, you'll keep buying a thesis that Wall Street is already walking away from. Go back to January 2025. DeepSeek drops. NVIDIA loses $600 billion in a single day. The media calls it a shock, but here's what it actually was. The opening act. Goldman Sachs just published a 50-page China AI LLM primer, and it isn't a 2-paragraph note. This is the kind of research document that moves institutional allocations. Goldman wrote it for its clients who manage billions. Here's the number, 95. Chinese AI models are at approximately 95% of the capability of the best US models, at 10% of the cost. And Goldman didn't arrive at that number alone. UBS ran their own independent analysis. Different firm, different analysts, same conclusion. When two of the largest banks on the planet independently land on the same number, that's not a coincidence. That's convergence. And convergence is what markets need before they move, because institutions don't reprice until they have institutional cover. Goldman just gave them that cover. The 50-page primer is the permission slip, and the clock on the pre-consensus window started the day Goldman published it. But here's what doesn't add up. Washington locked China out of the American chip supply. How do you close a 95% capability gap when you can't buy the hardware that builds these models? The whole argument for US AI dominance rested on one thing: export controls. NVIDIA H100s, A100s, the most powerful training chips in the world. US policy locked them out. China shouldn't have been able to train frontier models. That was the argument. That argument is dead. Here's how they did it. First, architecture. Chinese models use something called mixture of experts, MOE. In a standard model, every parameter activates on a single token. In MOE, only 3 to 5% of parameters activate per token. You get the same output at a fraction of the compute costs. You need less hardware. You burn less energy. Then June 27th, DeepSeek drops something called DSpark. They got 57 to 85% speed improvement, 0 weight changes, 0 quality loss. The model didn't change at all. They just found a dramatically more efficient way to run it. And then 3 days later, June 30th, 2026, Meituan published LongCat 2.0, 1.6 trillion parameters, frontier scale. Meituan trained it entirely on Huawei domestic chips, 0 US silicon. The export controls were supposed to freeze China's ability to train at scale. LongCat 2.0 trained at scale on Huawei chips. That's not a rumor. That's a published model. And the cost gap? Chinese models are running at about $1 per million tokens. US state-of-the-art is $4 to $8 per million tokens, 4 to 8 times more expensive for the same capability. LongCat 2.0 is the falsification event. It's the real-world proof that destroys the export control moat. Frontier training on domestic silicon isn't theoretical anymore. It happened 3 days ago. The moat is gone. So the models are competitive. The chips work without US hardware. The cost is 4 to 8 times cheaper. The question isn't whether Western enterprises will use Chinese AI. The question is whether they already are. Here's what most investors still believe: that there's clean separation. Western AI runs on Western infrastructure. Chinese AI stays in China. East is East, West is West. That's not the world that we live in. AWS Bedrock is hosting Chinese AI models today, not in a pilot program, in production. Google Cloud is hosting Chinese AI models today. And Microsoft CEO is on record considering putting DeepSeek on Azure. The 3 largest Western cloud providers have already made their infrastructure decision. They looked at the capability, they looked at the cost, and they decided Chinese AI belongs on their platforms. They're now the distribution layer. On the Chinese side, ByteDance holds 70% token market share inside China alone. That's an enormous data flywheel. More users means better models. Better models means more users. And the product is already expanding globally. Minimax is doing 60 to 70% of its revenue from outside China. not domestic, overseas. That's not a company with home market ambitions. That's a company that's already captured global market share. And at China major tech companies, AI-generated code went from 20 to 30% of their code bases to 90% in months. They're not planning agentic AI. They're shipping it. Western cloud providers didn't wait for a policy decision. They made a business decision. And that means Chinese AI isn't competing with AWS and Google Cloud. They're running on AWS and Google Cloud right now. That's not a future risk to model. It's current infrastructure to understand. So the capability is there, the hardware works, the distribution is already in place. The only question left is who captures the economics in the structure Goldman just described. Goldman answers that directly. Every Goldman primer ends the same way, with names, because names are the only thing that actually matters for positioning. But before the names, you need to understand why the timing is urgent right now. There's a crisis playing out inside of enterprise AI, and most retail investors haven't heard about it yet. Companies scaled up token usage, thinking more tokens meant more value. They got 10 times the tokens. They got 2 times the output. And they burned through their full year AI budgets in 4 months. That's the token maxing failure. Spending more didn't deliver proportional results. And it's forcing a shift in how enterprises measure AI. They're moving from tracking tokens to tracking daily active agents in agentic work units. The metric that matters now isn't what you're spending. It's whether the AI is actually doing work. When the metric shifts to ROI, the cheapest capable model wins. And the cheapest capable model is Chinese. DeepSeek v4 launches mid-July 2026. That's the next catalyst, and it's already in motion. Goldman projects Chinese AI revenue growing from RMB 35 billion in 2026 to RMB 879 billion by 2030. That's 25 times growth in 4 years. That's not an emerging sector story. That's a structural repricing of an asset class. And the names Goldman is telling its institutional clients to own: ZPU and DeepSeek for foundation model infrastructure, ByteDance for multimodal AI, Minimax. Goldman rates it a buy. But here's the catch for retail. Only 2 of these 4 are actually tradable. ZPU and Minimax went public in Hong Kong this January, while DeepSeek and ByteDance are still private. Goldman's verdict is that Chinese models have closed 95% of the capability gap. They built around US export controls using domestic Huawei chips. They're embedded inside AWS and Google Cloud, and they're on a trajectory to 25 times revenue growth by 2030. The named winners are ZPU, DeepSeek, ByteDance, and Minimax. That's what's in the 50 pages. Now you have it. DeepSeek v4 in mid-July. The trade isn't crowded yet. The window Goldman just opened is still open. Goldman named the winners. Now the question is when price confirms the story, and whether you have a process for knowing that. You now understand something that most retail traders won't see until it's already in price. That 2 of the world's largest investment banks independently concluded Chinese AI has closed the capability gap, destroyed the export control moat, and embedded itself inside of Western infrastructure with specific names and a catalyst already on the calendar. But knowing Goldman's thesis isn't the same as knowing what price is actually doing right now, or when this story becomes tradable. Here's what understanding this information also doesn't give you: the truth about the direction of price. It gives you a narrative, and narratives matter, but price is what tells you whether the narrative is true or not. The measured move is a framework for understanding the direction of price. It tells you whether this bullish narrative is being confirmed by price or not. If you act on a story like this without that framework, you could be on the wrong side of a trade for days, weeks, or even months until price confirms it. That's the framework that I teach. The traders in my community don't chase bullish narratives. They know what price has to do to confirm the story. And until it does, until price structure supports it, they're not in the trade just because the narrative is compelling. They wait for the setup. They have a process for knowing when it's there. That's the process I teach every day at eminiaddict.com.